In letter C of example 3, we have cosecant squared x multiplied by 1 minus cosine squared of x. And what I recognize is that I have something really cool going on here in the parentheses. Notice that that is one of our Pythagorean identities rearranged like we did in example 1. Just recall quickly that we have sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta is equal to 1. That is our Pythagorean identity like it would show up in a textbook. But what has happened here is that cosine squared of theta has been moved to the right-hand side of that identity so that sine squared of theta has been isolated. And so we can replace that parentheses with sine squared of x. Then we are multiplying by cosecant squared of x. Where can we go from here? Well, what we notice is that cosecant squared x can be rewritten in terms of sine squared of x. We know that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, and so using a reciprocal identity, we can rewrite this as 1 over the sine squared of x multiplied by sine squared of x, which just floats down to the next line. Then, if we actually multiply these things together, we know that this is sine squared x over 1, which means that we get sine squared of x divided by sine squared of x. And since that is just sine squared of x divided by itself, that's going to reduce to a 1. In letter D, I see that I have sine x multiplied by cosecant x minus sine of x. Notice here that we have two things that are in terms of sine of x, which means that if we can, we want to try to write cosecant x in terms of sine x. And we know that we can do that because these two things are reciprocals. And so if we change cosecant x to 1 over sine x, we can do that by a reciprocal identity. Everything else will just multiply down. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to distribute, which is perfectly legitimately fine for me to do. I'm going to distribute sine of x into this parentheses. And so when we multiply sine of x times 1 over sine of x, the sine of x's are going to cancel, and that will leave me with just 1. Then when I multiply sine x times sine x, that will be the same thing as sine of x quantity squared, which we write as the sine squared of x. Finally, what we're going to be able to do is recognize this as one of our rearrangements of our first Pythagorean identity. That was why it was so important that we did example 1, so that we could train our eyes to see this expression right here as being the same thing as cosine squared of x. And so again, going back to this original Pythagorean identity right here, what has happened now is that we have taken the sine squared of theta and moved that to the other side so that cosine squared of theta is by itself. And so that's how we're able to rewrite 1 minus sine squared of x simply as cosine